apologetics path here and just get some things learned. If this is boring you to death, get over it. No, I hope. I'll be honest, as a pastor, man, I tell you what, man, lady, I don't know. Not tonight. We will do them soon, okay? But not tonight, all right? And if you pout, we'll never do them. So, yeah, I am that person. Drop the gauntlet. I'll pick it up. And so anyway, as a pastor, I'm always wondering, did I go too far? Did I say too much? Did I cause people anguish? Did I hurt people? Or is this not helping somebody? And that's just my mentality. You know, it's just the way I do. And want to encourage you, if you do have struggles with anything that I say, just come and talk to me about it. And let's be two grown adults and deal with it. And likely I just misspoke, or likely you need to get your heart right. One of those two things happened, and maybe something else. I don't know. But anyway, tonight, this is one of those things where it's like we're going through a lot of facts. Is it helping? I don't know. I hope so. If it's not, then I don't know what to say, because I don't want to get in the habit of taking feedback and changing, because churches, the church feeds back, and so I change things. So, if you're struggling, just ask God to give you something. Ask God to help you. All right. And I find it tremendously fascinating, but I'm a nerd. And I don't know how much it's helping you if you're struggling, but like Sunday school, Sunday morning, and Wednesday night are all helps in all of your life issues. And so who'd have thought that going through the New Testament a couple of verses at a time would be so helpful? But it has been to me. Hope it has been to you. All right, Genesis chapter 10, verse 1. Genesis chapter number 10, verse 1. And the Bible says, "Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood, the sons of Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tiras. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, and Riphath, and Togarmah." You say, "Pastor, you can read those so well." You know that yearly read the Bible through in a year? I have read the book of Genesis 70 million times. I haven't read the Bible through very many times. I've read Genesis a lot. So anyway, verse number 4, "And the sons of Javan, Elisha, and Tarshish, and Kittim, and Dodanim. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided into their lands, every one after his tongue, after their families in their nations. And the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mizraim, and Phut, and Canaan. And the sons of Cush, Seba, and Havilah." By the way, that verse 5 just kind of jumps in there, right? The division by tongues. That's interesting. Pretty cool that we have that reference to the Tower of Babel and the flood, and that. So the after flood thing. But anyway, and Cush begat Nimrod, and he began to be mighty one in the earth. He was mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, and the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Asher, and builded Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth, and Calah. And Nineveh is one we know, right? Who went to Nineveh? Jonah. And did Nineveh listen to Jonah? Well, for a couple hundred years. And then we find out later they turned away and were destroyed. But they got a couple hundred years reprieve. That means a lot of kids and parents and stuff went to heaven. And so that's good. But anyway, we're talking about Ur. We left off. We're going through. We've talked about Old Testament dates. We've talked about archaeological treasures that confirm the Bible, like ancient writings, the Rosetta Stone, the Rock of Behustan, Hammurabi's Law. We talked about different things like that. And then last week we left off there, and we stopped at Ur of the Chaldees. Now who knows who came out of Ur? Abram came out of Ur. Anybody else come out of Ur? Lot came out of Ur. Anybody else come out of Ur? He came halfway out of Ur. Sarah came out of Ur. The camels? What about Isaac's wife? What about Jacob's wife? And anyway, so yes, they came out of Ur. So think of it. A lot of people came out of Ur. That's kind of where that's kind of where I'm sorry. That's where God's people, chosen people, came out of. Is out of Ur. Let's talk about Ur. Skeptics claim that Ur, the birthplace of Abraham, we know him as, you got it right, Abram came out of Ur and was later named Abraham. But Abram came out of Ur, but people say that was a myth prior to 1920. The ancient city was unearthed in the 1920s and 1930s under the direction of Charles Leonard Woolley. Amazing artifacts that have been recovered are how... Do you ever wonder if his name Woolley, if he was a hairy person? Does that ever cross your mind, like when you see names? Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, the amazing artifacts that have been recovered are housed in the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania Archaeology Museum. I'd love to go there, both of them. The excavations at Ur provide a wonderful glimpse in the civilization that spread across that part of the world after the flood and reveal the glories of the kingdoms established by Nimrod and his fellow kings and successors. And so we just read about Nimrod, right? That's why we went to Genesis to talk about Nimrod. You may think that the early civilizations were cavemen, that they were dumb and they were backwards and they drank dirty water and lived in dirt huts and stuff. And if they did live in dirt huts, it was out of desire and not out of need, right? There was advanced civilizations. Most of the false gods that we see portrayed today really came into prominence during Nimrod's day. And so a lot of these false gods, I hate to say this is not the path I wanted to go on tonight, but a good portion of contemporary Christian music references and the terminology, the typology references these false gods. Hillsong, which many of the contemporary songs come from, when they did their Christmas play, it was very paganistic. When they did their Easter play, it was a paganistic Easter play, and you don't want to even know what they do at Halloween. Quote-unquote Christian. And a lot of our contemporary songs contemporary songs come from that area, Hillsong, Bethel, music, and those all are blatantly anti-Christian. They're blatantly pagan in their worship and they're humanistic in their ideologies, yet we still will allow ourselves to listen to contemporary Christian songs. That's a different subject that we'll get into at a later time, but many of those either reference back to Baal worship, which finds its roots in Nimrod's day, or those artists have since come out as gay, ecumenical, and when I say ecumenical, I mean not just Protestant, but crossing into the Catholic realm with ecumenicalism, and but Nimrod started all that Baal worship and Marduk and all that kind of stuff. We'll talk about just briefly. We can better understand the world which Abraham grew up and from which God called him in 1920 BC. Isn't that interesting? Around 1920 BC, Abraham was called out of Ur, and around 1920 AD, Ur is discovered again. That's kind of cool to me, but I don't know if it's significant. Probably not. We see the pagan gods that Abraham's father Terah worshipped. Joshua 24:2. Joshua 24:2, and that is going to be somewhere in the Bible, just after the Pentateuch. Joshua 24:2, and Joshua said unto all the people, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood in old time, even Terah, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods. They served other gods. So Terah served these other gods. Let's talk about Ur. Ur was technologically advanced, and it was very wealthy. It was a great city, maybe 250,000 people, maybe twice that, maybe even 500,000 people lived in the city of Ur. Following is a description from the city about 2500 BC. From about 2500 BC to the time of Abraham, this is a description of that city by the archaeologists. It was an urban civilization of a highly evolved type. Its artists were capable of a very vivid realism, followed for the most part standards and conventions whose excellence had been approved by many generations working before them. So it was a well-established artistic society. Its craftsmen in metal possessed a knowledge of metallurgy and a technical skill which few ancient peoples have ever rivaled, and which it must have taken long years to perfect. Its merchants carried far-flung trade, its agriculture prospered, its armed forces were organized, and men practiced freely the art of writing. Ur was a trading and manufacturing center. Its business extended far afield, raw materials imported, sometimes from overseas, to be worked in the Ur factories. The bill of lading of a merchant ship, which came up the canal from the Gulf to discharge its cargo on the wharves of Ur, detail copper, gold, hardwoods, ivory, pearls, precious stones. Broad fields of corn and barley were there. Market gardens, groves of date palms, fig trees stretched as far as the eye could see. These spacious estates could cheerfully bear comparison with Canadian wheat farms or the market gardens and fruit farms of California. Many goods were manufactured in factories owned by the temple. So you think factories started in America? They had factories in Ur. They were doing factory-style processes in Ur to build stuff. One workshop produced 12 different kinds of fashionable clothing. Tablets found there gave the names of the mill girls and their quota of rations. Even the weight of the wool given to each worker and the number of garments made was meticulously recorded. In one of the legal buildings, they found copies of the sentences carefully stacked exactly as they are in administrative offices of modern law courts. Ur of the Chaldees was a powerful, prosperous, colorful, busy capital city in the beginning of the second millennium B.C. The homes in Ur were very impressive. So think about Abraham going off into Canaan land and not having a permanent home. He came from a place where he would have had a very beautiful home, a very elegant home. Somebody said this, Free and Vos in Archaeology and the Bible history, an average dwelling measured 40 by 52 feet. The lower walls were built of burned brick, the upper of mud brick. The whole wall was usually plastered and whitewashed. An entrance lobby led into the central court, onto which all the rooms opened, like a living room. On the lower floor were located the servants' room, a living room with an open sky. I mean, it would have been an internal court area, courtyard type thing. The kitchen, the lavatory, the guest chamber, and also a lavatory and wash place reserved for visitors. Thus, all of the first floor was utilized for the servants and guests. The second floor housed the family. The entire house of the average middle-class person had from 10 to 20 rooms. So Ur was a little bit wealthy. All right. I mean, the average middle-class home is like 12 to 1,600 square foot here. You know, you can fit 1.5 bedrooms and a garage in there. The rooms of the houses were filled with tables and chairs, even folding chairs. Even folding chairs in Ur. Beds with wooden bedsteads, chests, ornate pottery, wicker work, and rugs. The houses had private wells. Some had. This is 4,000 years ago. The houses had private wells. Some had running water to kitchens and toilets. Water and waste were carried away by a city sewer in Ur 4,000 years ago. Yeah, they are, but they're helpful. It's better than, cleaning out the composting toilet every day. And so, anyway, let's keep going. Ur's skilled carpenters used hammers, saws, chisels, drill bits. Metal workers fashioned gold, silver, tin, lead, iron, copper, bronze, and antimony. They used techniques such as casting, hammering, annealing, filigree, and granulation. Things that take very fine, detailed work. Goods were transported by sledges, wagons, chariots, and boats. An intricate system of canals, reservoirs, dikes, and ditches irrigated the crops. They were skilled in the use of leveling instruments and measuring rods, and drawing and map making. So they were good at all of those things. Pretty cool. They raised sheep, goats, pigs, cows, oxen, consumed over 50 types of fish that were caught. The graves of the kings of Ur, there's other stuff, farming techniques, that they would use. The graves of the kings of Ur contain golden drinking cups, dishes, goblets, wonderfully shaped jugs, vases, bronze tableware, mother of pearl mosaics, ornaments made of gold, silver, and lapis lazuli, which is a semi-precious stone that is very blue. Even the famous tombs of Nefertiti and Tutankhamun contain no more beautiful objects than the kings of Ur. The graves of the kings of Ur are moreover 1,000 years older than Tutankhamun and Nefertiti, whose beautiful, Tutankhamun is probably one of the most beautiful graves we have given to us. Yet the kings of Ur, remember they're the redheaded stepchildren that were fables? Yeah, their burial places were just as ornate as the Egyptian burial places. So why aren't they in the museums? Right? They were 1,000 years older. We may not have good representation of them. But they were harps and lyres, and not lyres. There probably were lyres, but a musical instrument, a lyre. It might be called a lyre, I don't know. Lyres says lyres to me, but I don't know. There were spears, helmets, daggers, golden blades. Daggers with golden blades. That means they weren't afraid of needing to use them. They were just ornamentation. So they were a society that was fairly secure with their common folks. Golden blades and hilts of blue lapis lazuli decorated with gold studs. Very, very affluent. Amazing bright headdresses of flowers and leaves fashioned from gold and silver sheets. Lapis lazuli. They like that color. One lyre was decorated with the head of a bull fashioned of gold with eyes, a beard, horn tips of deep blue. You guessed it, lapis lazuli. An Ur king was buried with an amazing gold helmet, which is shown in the British Museum. It was a helmet of beaten gold made to fit low over the head with cheek pieces to protect the face. It was in the form of a wig, the locks of hair hammered up in relief, and individual hairs shown by delicate engraved lines. Parted down the middle, the hair covers the head in flat, wavy tresses, bound round with a twisted fillet. Behind is tied into a little chignon, whatever that is. Below the fillet hangs in rows of formal curls. He had a golden helmet etched into a wig. I mean, this is a affluent, advanced, wealthy society. Woolley observed that on the basis of these items, we would accord the people of Ur of a high rank in the roll of civilized races, meaning Ur was up there with Egypt. Ur was up there with Rome at the height of its civilization. Ur was up there with Darius, the Persians and the Medes. Ur was high. A mosaic in one of the tombs, called the Royal Standard of Ur, was made of shell, red limestone, and lapis lazuli. One side depicts scenes of war and the other a victory feast. The war scenes, 3 rows are described this way. In the top row, a king stands in the center, distinguished by his great height, with behind him 3 attendants or members of his house, a dwarf-like groom who holds the heads of 2 asses which draw the monarch's empty chariot, while the driver of it walks behind, holding the reins. In front of the king, soldiers are bringing up prisoners, naked with their arms bound behind their backs to him to decide their fate. In the second row come a phalanx of the royal army, heavy armed infantry, in close quarter with copper helmets exactly like those found in the king's grave, long cloaks of some stiff material which look like felt. Just such cloaks are worn by the shepherds of Turkey today, holding axes in their hands. In front of them are light armed infantry. So you get it. This was a very detailed mosaic in 3 stages: the battle, the victory, the feast. Let's keep moving. Let's talk about Ur's literacy. Thousands of cuneiform tablets and fragments were found at Ur. Among those were student exercise books. They had student exercise books etched on stone. Learning how to read and write. There are tables of verbs and tables of square and cube roots. The students, so you remember your multiplication tables? Well, they had squares and cube roots for their students, and so advanced math. The students of Ur had a correct understanding of Pythagoras' theorem 1,200 years prior to Pythagoras and his theorem. Now, did Pythagoras steal it? No, don't think that. It's 1,200 years later. He probably rediscovered it, you know. And so before Pythagoras formulated it. The tablets of Ur also include religious myths, proverbs, riddles, essays, and moral precepts, meaning an organized society. Ur was idolatrous. Ur was steeped in idolatry. The people worshiped many gods and goddesses. The chief was the moon god Sin, also called Nana. So if you ever had a mother-in-law, you understand what I'm talking about. And Nana was a man, actually, as a male god. And his Nana, N-A-N-N-A. And his wife Ningal. Sin, or Nana, was also the chief god in Haran, where Abraham's father Terah died. So Abraham, as he's leaving Ur, he's leaving wealth, comfort, security, affluence. He's leaving his gods behind. His father couldn't do it. His father had to stop in Haran and died there. And then Abraham was able to move on because he couldn't leave those gods. The symbol of the moon god was a crescent, which became the symbol of Islam after Muhammad exalted the moon god. You see those ties? That there is ties back to Ur in Muhammad's religion there. Translated the Standard Edition of the Quran, said E.M. Worry, who translated the Standard Edition of the Quran, said that pre-Islamic times, Allah worship, as well as the worship of Baal, were involved in the worship of sun, moon, and stars, which would have been what Ur was involved in. Remember who founded these places? It would have been Nimrod, founded some of these places, and the brethren there. There was also Shamash, the sun god. Ningal was only one of many goddesses worshipped in Ur and its neighboring cities. There was Ishtar, Lama, Galu, Bo, among others. As you'll see, when we get to Babylon, goddess worship began in Babel and spread through the earth. Plays still a large role in Hinduism. And by the way, when I say that like Bethel and Hillsong, they worship these female gods. In fact, New Evangelical Christianity worships the feminine. And I'm not saying that we should, are you being chauvinistic about it? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying they elevate the feminine in worship, which is what happened with these pagan rituals. All right? Which is to go against the Godhead, which is masculine in its creation. Not, I don't have to justify myself. You either understand it or you don't. But I'm not being massive, male, whatever. There were idolatrous shrines scattered throughout Ur and in their homes. So they were organized enough in their religion that they had shrines in their homes, in their individual homes. We can safely imagine that throughout the whole of the sprawling town of Ur, there were scattered temples dedicated to one or another of the innumerable gods. Such shrines appear to have been a particular resort of women. So it's that the divine, they call it, in the pagan realm, they call it the divine feminine. Right? So Hinduism is based around a female god, Shiva, and some other stuff there. And so, and here also, even in the male-dominated Muslim world, their roots are female goddesses. Ur had a tower. You'll notice a theme. Ur had a tower, gigantic tower, stage tower, or a ziggurat, devoted to Sin and Nigal and the worship of the heavens. Originally, it was 200 feet by 500 feet at the base and was 75 feet high. It has been partially reconstructed and today stands about half that height. The inner core was made of mud brick and was protected by a thick outer layer of baked bricks set in bitumen or asphalt. The use of bitumen fits the description of the building of the first Tower of Babel. What is bitumen? Basically gunk. You know, when they built the Tower of Babel, they mudded the bricks with gunk. I can't remember the exact word right now, slime or whatever, pitch. And so they used burned brick and slime or bitumen in Genesis 11:3. The word slime is translated asphaltos, like asphalt. So Ur's tower was reminiscent of the original one, the Tower of Babel. You'll find out that all over the world are towers, ziggurats, even the stepped towers that you find in the Americas are very much similar to what they, kind of could think of as, and they worship, what do they worship at the top of those step towers? The sun god, or the goddess there, different times, different manifestations. It was a very beautiful tower. Each stage would have been a different color. Foundation was black, the upper stage is red and blue. Each stage probably answered to the astrological colors associated with the planets. The shrine at the apex was built of bright blue glazed bricks topped with a golden dome. Interesting. Some of the doors of the temple were overlaid with gold, and some of the walls and ceilings were covered with sheets of gold cut into open-work patterns with shield-shaped holes into which were set inlays of agate or lapis lazuli. Parts of the temple buildings were decorated with beautiful designs fashioned from colored cones pressed into thick plaster. It was just beautiful. They worshiped the building. They worshiped the sun god, of course. As the confounded Babel workers spread out and associated together by language, they carried their idolatry and love for mystical religious towers with them, constructing those towers wherever they would go. Woolley said the great staged towers, and I lost my spot, characterized of the cities of Sumer and were a peculiar feature of the Mesopotamian architecture. So you'd see them all over Sumer and Mesopotamia, these towers. Also, they for religious rites, they would see mass suicide and human sacrifices. That would be their religious rites, and we won't go into all of the descriptions of that. Well, I might not go into anything if I can't get this thing to scroll. And then let's see, confirmation of the Bible here. Everything that's been discovered about Ur fits the ancient Mesopotamian world as described in the Bible. Genesis 4 describes an advanced literate civilization, exactly what we'd expect in light of that Genesis revelation. A record says Adam's first children built cities and practiced such things as agriculture, animal husbandry, music, and metalworking in Genesis 4. The pagan idolatry and astral worship and the religious towers are described in Genesis 10 and 11 and Romans 1. The spread of city-states across Shinar and Mesopotamia are described in Genesis 10. The timetable also fits the biblical scenario. When the Babylonian ruler Nabonidus restored the Ur Tower in his day, 556 BC, he stated that it was originally built some 1,500 years earlier, which would have been about 2050 BC. By the biblical timeline, that takes us back to about 2 centuries after God confounded Nimrod's Babel project. By then, the shock of the divisions of tongues had worn off, and men were gathered together according to language, and were also learning to communicate cross-lingually. So 200 years later is when Ur became at a height when intercommerce would have been capable again. There's also here, it may be now obvious that Ur existed as a great city in Abraham's day. Even though that is true, unbelieving archaeologists have found another way to discredit the Bible. They claim Ur was not associated with the Chaldees until centuries later. Therefore, the Bible is wrong to use the term in reference to Abraham's day. Archaeologists cannot prove the Bible wrong here, but since they have not found corroborating evidence, they charge the Bible with error. But remember, originally, they didn't believe that Ur even existed, and now they want to say, well, the Bible's wrong because Ur and the Chaldees were not associated until years later. Well, when do you think this might have been written? Years and years later. So, when Moses said Ur of the Chaldees, he might have been referenced to something that was modern, where they may not have been associated when Abraham went. I don't know the truth of that. I'm just saying that they're discrediting something. They lost the first time. Let's shift a little bit. Let's go to another place real quick. We'll do Egypt. Yeah, well, who went down into Egypt this morning? Who was taken into Egypt by slavers this morning? Who was in the pit? Joseph, that's right. Because his brothers sold him because they were jealous, right? That's Miss Anderson, but yeah. All right, the following overview of Egypt's ancient history under the pharaohs is adapted from Alan McRae. Let me give you a few things. It's usual to think of ancient Egyptian history divided into 30 dynasties. His idea is taken from a book on the Egyptian history by Manetho, an Egyptian priest who wrote about 250 BC. Selections from Manetho's books are in here. I'm not going to give all this. The Old Kingdom would have been from 2700 to 2200 BC, running from dynasties 3 to 6, Pharaohs were very dictatorial. They were able to gather hundreds of thousands of people each year during the seasons the Nile overflowed its bank and made agricultural work impossible, and compelled them to work energetically for long periods in order to build burial monuments. The Middle Kingdom, 1991 to 1786, was a time of great power when the kings of a region in the south, centered around the town known as Thebes, became supreme over all Egypt and established power in the delta. The New Kingdom, also called the Empire, followed the expulsion of Hyksos, who was the last king of the Middle Kingdom. It lasted from about 1570 to 1078 BC. They worshipped the god Amun, whom they considered to be identical to the earlier sun god Re, and therefore often referred to as Amun-Re. And a multitude of other gods were also worshipped in Egypt, but the priests of Amun-Re became so important they eventually had a very large portion of the land of Egypt came to be the property of the temples of the god Amun. It's a very interesting history of the Egyptians. And you could watch many hour documentaries on it and still not know everything, and so we're not going to do that here. Between the 7th and 4th century BC, Egypt was harassed and sometimes partly conquered by the Assyrians, Babylonians, and Persians. In 332, a very famous person named Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, and after his death, a year later, how old was Alexander the Great when he died? Anybody remember? 32 years old. They don't know if he died of poison or some illness or what happened, but they don't have a record. But anyway, 332 A.D., a year later after his death, Ptolemy seized Egypt and established a dynasty that continued three centuries. The Ptolemaic dynasty was 300 years. The first mention of Egypt in the Bible, that's a pretty good general if he produced some guy behind him, because Ptolemy was one of Alexander's generals. He produced a general that had a dynasty that lasted 300 years. Alexander the Great may not have conquered the entire world, but he did produce some good generals, right? And so, but anyway, the first mention of Egypt, I'm not saying I like Alexander the Great and he's my hero. I didn't say that. Don't think that. The first mention of Egypt in the Bible is Genesis 12, when Abraham went there to escape the famine in Canaan. That would have been in the timeline about 1900 BC. It was to Egypt that Jacob and his sons moved to escape the great famine after Joseph became vice ruler. Israel dwelt in Egypt for 400 years before departing under the leadership of Moses in about 1490 BC. Egypt was often used by God to judge Israel during the time of Judges. Joseph was in Egypt. Y'all remember that? Now, there is no direct evidence of Joseph's rule in Egypt or of Israel's sojourn there that we've uncovered so far, but it's not surprising for three reasons. First, the archaeological record from that time period is scant, and the ancient documents written on papyri have perished. Second, the Egyptians did not leave historical narrative writings like Genesis or the books of Samuel and Kings. They didn't have Chronicles in Egypt. All right, so it wasn't the same thing. No attempt is made to give a full picture of a historical situation or development in Egypt. A continuous account of the reign of successive kings is nowhere to be found. A great handicap in the study of Egyptian literature as far as its use for history is concerned is the fact that most of it was written for an immediate purpose, often merely to glorify the person involved. Remember, the Egyptian kings were gods. And they were very dynasty-oriented. And when one dynasty would take over, it often purged what happened in the previous dynasty, and this continued to happen. Third, most of the ancient Egyptian records are from the accounts of military victories. No pharaoh would have recorded a great defeat, such as the defeat of Israel over Egypt. Though there's no direct confirmation from archaeology, there's a great deal of indirect evidence that authenticates the biblical record. So things around Joseph are authenticated, and therefore it lends credence to Joseph. Moses is Pharaoh. Who was Moses' Pharaoh? Anybody know? You're right. Nobody knows. That's exactly right. We have some guesses. It could have been Ramses. Yeah. I'll give you a few. There were probably at least two pharaohs associated with Moses' life. One who ruled when he was born, and another who ruled during the Exodus, because those times were vastly departed from one another. Israel and Egypt was in Egypt from about 1876 to about 1446. At the end of this period, God raised up Moses to lead them in the Promised Land. Exodus 1:8, Exodus 1:22, Exodus 2, blah, blah, blah. Hebrews 11:24, we have the account of Moses. The daughter of Pharaoh who rescued Moses from the river is thought to have been Hatshepsut. So that's H-A-T-S-H-E. Hatshepsut. 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 I don't know where the emphasis would go. But they believe that that may have been the Pharaoh's daughter that rescued Moses, Hatshepsut. Glad I didn't live in Egypt. She was the daughter of Pharaoh Tutmosis I, probably issued the 2 decrees that all Israelite babies be killed. That's Pharaoh Tutmosis I. If so, it was Hatshepsut who rescued Moses. A noted historian wrote, "Only she of all known women of the period possessed the presumption and independence to violate an ordinance of the king under his very nose. She married her younger half-brother who became Tutmosis II. Moses, by this construction, would have been her foster son." There's a red granite obelisk inscribed with the name of Queen Hatshepsut in the British Museum. There's a statue of Tutmosis I also there. When Moses was 40 years old, he killed an Egyptian for abusing a Jewish slave, had to flee the desert where he lived for 40 years. God appeared to him in a burning bush and he came back. So it would have been, Exodus occurred 80 years after Moses was rescued from the waters. He would have been 80 years old. It's not a simple matter of identity. It's not a simple matter to identify the Pharaoh of Exodus. Liberal archaeologists have named Ramses II, also written Ramses, but he lived after Moses according to the biblical timeline. The reason they make this claim is that they've rejected the Bible's dating. They believe that Israel entered the land of Canaan about 1250 BC, where it was actually around 1450 BC. According to biblical dating, Moses appeared before Pharaoh about 1490 BC. Some say it was Amenophis II. The bottom line is that while it's interesting to speculate about the Pharaoh Moses confronted, the Bible doesn't give his name, therefore it is not important to know. How about that? The very fact the Bible does not name the Pharaoh until Shishak in the 10th century BC demonstrates its infallible accuracy. That one would have been accurate. Who was Egypt's gods? We'll finish Egypt here tonight. The idolatry was spread from Babylon throughout the world. Egypt was an early stronghold of idolatry. The pharaohs were worshipped as gods, and every aspect of the pyramids had idolatrous implications. Among the most famous of Egyptians' gods was the bull or calf, which Israel also worshipped in the wilderness. The Archaeological Museum at the University of Pennsylvania has a large collection of ancient Egyptian bull gods. Interesting that Egypt created themselves a bull god when that was one of the most, Israel did. That was one of the most prominent gods. The Egyptians, Baal was worshipped as a bull. Some of these types of Baal images have been found in Israel. The Egyptians worshipped the sun god Ra. He was depicted as a falcon-headed man with a disc above his head. Isn't it interesting that the Catholics put discs above the heads of all the saints? Any important person in their depictions. And Ra was depicted. What was the disc above Ra's head? It was the sun. And Ra is depicted that way. And then the Catholics depict. I'm not hating on the Catholics. I'm just saying what's going on there, right? The sun god was also symbolized by a falcon, blah, blah. The pyramids were associated with the worship of the sun. They were built in alignment with the rising and setting of the sun and many other things. The serpent was worshipped, interesting enough, in Egypt as the goddess Wadjet, the protectress of Egypt. So the serpent was a protectress of Egypt. Double golden images of Wadjet were found in the tomb of King Tut. I remember when I was a kid and I got to go to the King Tut. They had that roaming, and you could put the tape player in the headphones, and it would take you around. And my Aunt Deborah took me to that when I was a kid, and when they had it in Dallas. And so King Tut. But anyway, King Tut and Egypt's glory, blah blah blah. We don't need to know all that. The Egyptian doctrine of salvation dates back to Cain and his offering of good works to God in the place of the prescribed sacrificial lamb. The Egyptian Book of the Dead says the deceased is led into a hall of judgment by Anubis. There his heart is weighed against the feather of Mot, which represents the goddess of truth, signifying the weighing of one's good works and the testing of one's heart. If the individual passes the judgment, he is received into the presence of God. If not, he's punished. The vast majority of people everywhere believe the fundamentals of the ancient Egyptian lie, which goes all the way back to Cain, that we work for salvation. Boy, there's a lot about Egyptian. There is a Mernapt stele. The most ancient extra-biblical reference to Israel is the Mernapt stele, which dates to 1229 BC. It was erected by the Egyptian pharaoh Merneptah to celebrate a military campaign in Canaan. So in 1200 BC, we know that Israel and Egypt had some kind of interaction. The event occurred during the period of the Judges. Reference to Israel having no seed is a reference. Here's what it says, quote, Canaan is captive with all woe. Ashkelon is conquered. Gezer seized. Yanoam made non-existent. Israel is wasted, bare of seed. Kor is become a widow of Egypt. And all who roamed have been subdued by the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Ber-Namarim, son of Ra, Mernapti, content with Ma'at, given life by like Ray every day. The references to Israel having no seed is a reference to the destruction of the nation's food supply. Though brief, it's highly significant. It was written during the time of Judges. Proves that even Israel was a nation of some importance in the time of Judges. It wasn't just wandering people. And so, very important. We'll get into Babylon next time. All right, let's go ahead and we'll just do a time of invitation. Maybe this morning's Sunday school, maybe this morning's message, maybe something's happened throughout the day and you have a need to seek the Lord, you can do that now. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for being good to us, and we pray that you'll be with those that are missing tonight, and be with those that have been missing lately. Father, I pray that you work in our church, I pray that you continue to bless our church, help us to grow. Lord, I pray that you